Commander Morrison walked into the weapons room and saw a small woman cleaning a big rifle. He thought she was just a maintenance worker. He had no idea she held the world's longest sniper kill record, a shot from over 2 miles away that changed everything. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The Afghan sun blazed mercilessly over Forward Operating Base Bravo as Commander Jack Morrison strode through the weapons maintenance facility, his polished boots echoing against the concrete floor. The sterile armory smelled of gun oil and metal cleaner, rows of weapon racks standing at attention like silent soldiers. At a workbench in the corner, a slight figure in standard ACUs methodically disassembled a Barrett M82A 1.50 caliber rifle, each movement precise and reverent. Sergeant Maya Chen didn't look up when Morrison entered with his 2 SEAL operators trailing behind. She'd grown accustomed to being invisible, just another face in the vast machinery of military operations. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, minimal rank insignia visible on her uniform. Despite her small frame, she handled the massive Barrett with practiced ease, every tool in its designated place, every motion economical and purposeful. "This where you keep the long guns?" Morrison's voice boomed through the facility as he surveyed the room with the casual authority of someone accustomed to command. His weathered face and broad shoulders embodied everything the military valued in special operations leadership. Maya glanced up briefly, her dark eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second before returning to the bolt carrier group she was cleaning. The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Morrison approached her workbench, watching her work with the detached interest of someone observing a machine in operation. "Look at that Barrett," he commented to his men. "Beautiful piece of equipment. Takes real skill to make shots with something like that." His tone carried the implicit understanding that such skill was beyond the person currently handling the weapon. "You do good work, soldier," Morrison said directly to Maya, his voice taking on the patronizing tone reserved for support staff. "Important job, keeping these weapons mission-ready for the real operators." The word real hung in the air like cordite after a shot. Maya's hands never paused in their methodical cleaning, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard variations of this speech countless times, from countless officers who saw her uniform and made immediate assumptions about her capabilities. Morrison warmed to his subject, apparently mistaking her silence for rapt attention. "Women have always been good with detail work like this," he continued, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone stating obvious facts. "Takes patience, fine motor skills. Not everyone can handle the pressure of actually pulling the trigger downrange, but maintenance? That's valuable work." The facility door opened again as Staff Sergeant Torres entered carrying ammunition crates, his timing unfortunately perfect to witness Morrison's impromptu lecture on gender roles and combat operations. "Commander Morrison? I'm Torres, your liaison. Ready for the range briefing?" Torres's voice carried a slight edge of discomfort as he glanced between Morrison and Maya. Morrison barely acknowledged the interruption. "Almost. Just admiring the craftsmanship here. Your armorer does solid work." The word armorer carried the weight of assumption, categorizing Maya into a neat, non-threatening box of military support personnel. Torres shifted the ammunition crates, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge a senior officer's assumptions. "Yes sir, weapons maintenance is critical to operations," he agreed diplomatically. "Exactly," Morrison said, his voice gaining momentum. "Support personnel like this are the backbone of what we do. While we're out there taking the difficult shots, someone needs to make sure our equipment is pristine." He gestured toward Maya as if she were an example in a training manual, a prop to illustrate his point about the natural order of military hierarchy. Maya finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting Morrison's with an intensity that should have given him pause. Instead, he interpreted her attention as validation of his wisdom. "How long have you been doing maintenance work?" Morrison asked directly, his tone suggesting he was generously taking interest in the career of a subordinate. "Long enough, sir," Maya replied quietly, her voice steady and controlled. The brevity of her answer should have suggested depths unexplored, but Morrison heard only appropriate deference. Morrison nodded approvingly. "Good answer. Stay in your lane, do your job well, and you'll have a solid career keeping warriors like us in the fight." The casual arrogance in his voice was breathtaking, the easy assumption that his lane was combat while hers was support, that his courage was tested while hers was safely theoretical. Torres cleared his throat more insistently. "Sir, the range demonstration is scheduled for 1,400 hours." His discomfort was becoming more apparent, though Morrison remained oblivious to the undercurrents in the room. Right, Morrison said, finally tearing his attention away from his impromptu mentoring session. Let's go see some real marksmanship. The word real struck like a physical blow, and Maya's knuckles whitened as she gripped a cleaning rod with carefully controlled force. As Morrison and his entourage departed, the facility fell silent except for the methodical sounds of Maya resuming her work. She cleaned each component with the same meticulous care, but now her movements carried an undercurrent of barely contained emotion. Years of similar encounters had taught her to channel such moments into focus, to let the assumptions of others fuel her precision rather than her anger. Later that afternoon, Morrison stood at the 1,000-meter sniper range, watching his operators demonstrate their skills with professional appreciation. The Barrett .50 caliber rifles thundered across the Afghan landscape, each shot carefully calculated for wind, temperature, and distance. His men were good, very good, consistently hitting targets that would challenge most marksmen. Impressive shooting, Torres commented, standing beside Morrison as they observed through spotting scopes. These are elite operators, Morrison replied with obvious pride. Takes years of training to develop this level of precision. The mental discipline, the physical conditioning, the ability to perform under extreme pressure. It's not something you can teach to just anyone. The demonstration continued for another hour, Morrison's team showcasing the skills that had made them legends in special operations circles. Shots at 800 meters, 1,000 meters, each one a testament to the countless hours of training that separated elite operators from ordinary soldiers. As the session concluded, Morrison was reviewing the day's performance data when Torres approached with a manila folder marked Classified. "Sir, I thought you might be interested in seeing the base's marksmanship records," Torres said, his voice carefully neutral. "Since you're evaluating our sniper capabilities." Morrison accepted the folder with casual interest, expecting to see confirmation of what he already knew, that his operators represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship. He flipped through pages of data, noting distances, conditions, and confirmed kills with professional interest. Then he stopped, his finger freezing on a particular entry. The numbers seemed impossible, so far beyond normal parameters that he initially assumed it was a typographical error. "What the hell is this?" Morrison demanded, pointing at the entry. 3,247 meters? That's over 2 miles. This has to be a mistake. Torres's expression remained carefully neutral. "No sir, that's accurate. Confirmed kill, witnessed by multiple observers, verified through multiple intelligence sources." Morrison stared at the numbers, his mind struggling to process their implications. The longest confirmed sniper kill in his unit was 1,847 meters, a shot that had earned its maker a commendation and legendary status among special operations snipers. This record shattered that achievement by nearly a mile. "Who made this shot?" Morrison asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Torres paused, glancing around the range as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Sergeant Chin, sir. Maya Chin." The name hit Morrison like a physical blow. "Chin? The armorer? The woman from the weapons facility?" "She's not an armorer, sir," Torres said quietly. "She's a sniper. One of the best we've ever had." Morrison's world tilted on its axis. The slight figure he'd patronized that morning, the woman he'd lectured about staying in her lane, was the author of what appeared to be an impossible feat of marksmanship. His mind raced through the calculations required for such a shot: wind compensation across multiple climate zones, bullet drop over more than 2 miles, the Coriolis effect, temperature variations, humidity, barometric pressure, target movement, and a dozen other variables that would challenge even the most sophisticated ballistics computers. "Tell me about this shot," Morrison demanded, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Torres consulted the file, though it was clear he knew the details by heart. Taliban commander, high-value target, fortified position in the mountains. Traditional assault would have cost multiple casualties. Sergeant Chen was positioned on an adjacent peak, 3,247 meters away according to GPS measurements. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he absorbed the implications. At that distance, the bullet would have taken nearly 4 seconds to reach its target, traveling in a parabolic arc that rose several stories above the ground at its apex. The target wouldn't even hear the shot until after the bullet arrived. "The conditions were brutal," Torres continued. "Crosswind gusting up to 40 knots, temperature differential between firing position and target area was over 30 degrees, target was partially concealed behind concrete barriers. 1 shot, 1 kill. Clean center mass." Morrison felt his assumptions crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Everything he thought he knew about marksmanship, about combat capabilities, about who belonged on the sharp end of military operations, was being rewritten by a woman he'd dismissed as a support technician. Why? Why didn't anyone tell me? Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Torres shrugged. You didn't ask, sir. You saw someone maintaining weapons and made assumptions about their role. Sergeant Chin doesn't advertise her achievements. She lets her work speak for itself. The irony was devastating. Morrison, who prided himself on tactical awareness and situational assessment, had completely failed to recognize one of the most lethal operators on the base. His expertise in reading people, honed through years of combat leadership, had been utterly defeated by his own biases. I need to see her, Morrison said, closing the file with hands that were no longer steady. They found Maya where Morrison had left her, methodically cleaning and inspecting weapons with the same quiet precision. But now Morrison saw her differently. The steady hands that he'd attributed to feminine attention to detail were the same hands that had made an impossible shot. The quiet demeanor he'd mistaken for deference was actually the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Maya looked up as Morrison approached, her expression neutral but alert. She'd clearly heard about his reaction to discovering her record, but her face betrayed nothing. Sergeant Chin, Morrison began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. How do you apologize for assumptions so fundamental that they'd shaped your entire worldview? How do you acknowledge that your expertise was meaningless in the face of such extraordinary skill? Maya saved him from his struggle. You have questions about the shot, sir? Her voice was calm, professional, giving him an opening to recover some dignity from the wreckage of his preconceptions. Morrison nodded gratefully. 3,247 meters. The ballistics alone? How do you even begin to calculate something like that? Maya's expression softened slightly, recognizing genuine professional curiosity rather than condescension. The Barrett fires a 750-grain match-grade round at approximately 2,800 feet per second, she began, her voice taking on the cadence of someone discussing a technical subject she knew intimately. At that distance, you're looking at nearly 4 seconds of flight time, which means accounting for Earth rotation, multiple wind layers, temperature gradients, humidity variations, and target movement. Morrison listened with growing amazement as Maya detailed the calculations that had gone into her record-breaking shot. Her understanding of external ballistics was deeper than that of most ballistics engineers, her knowledge of atmospheric conditions more comprehensive than meteorologists he'd worked with. The real challenge, Maya continued, isn't the mathematics. Modern ballistics software can handle most of the calculations. The challenge is reading conditions that can't be measured. Microclimates, thermal layers, wind patterns that change between you and the target. At 2 miles, a 5-degree error in wind estimation means a complete miss. Morrison realized he was listening to someone whose understanding of long-range shooting transcended anything in his experience. His operators were skilled, but their longest confirmed kills were made at distances where Maya was just getting started. The Taliban commander, Morrison said. Tell me about that day. Maya was quiet for a moment and Morrison wondered if he was pushing too hard. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of memory. Intelligence had been tracking him for months. He was responsible for coordinating attacks against 3 different forward operating bases. Every time we sent teams after him, he'd disappear into the mountains like smoke. Her hands continued their methodical work on the rifle components as she spoke, muscle memory allowing her to maintain focus on both tasks. His compound was fortress-like. Approaching on foot would have meant crossing 2 miles of open ground under observation from multiple positions. Air strikes were impossible due to civilian populations in the area. Command was considering whether to write him off as untouchable. Morrison found himself leaning forward, drawn into the tactical puzzle that Maya was describing. I spent 3 days studying the location through drone footage and satellite imagery, Maya continued. Found a position on a parallel ridge that offered a clear line of sight. The distance was extreme, but the angle was clean, and the terrain would mask my muzzle flash from his security teams. The professional calm in her voice couldn't quite hide the intensity of the memory. Morrison realized he was hearing about preparation that went far beyond marksmanship. This was operational planning at the highest level. The weather was the biggest variable, Maya said. Mountain conditions are notoriously unstable. I had to time the shot for a brief window when the winds would be predictable enough to calculate accurately. Morrison's understanding of the shot's complexity deepened with every detail. This wasn't just exceptional marksmanship, it was a combination of technical expertise, tactical planning, meteorological analysis, and psychological pressure management that few operators could have handled. When you took the shot, Morrison asked, how confident were you? Maya paused, considering the question seriously. Confident enough to take it, she said finally. But at that distance, with that many variables, you're never certain. You calculate everything you can, account for everything you can predict, and then you trust your training and execute. The quiet confidence in her voice was more impressive than any boasting could have been. Morrison realized he was listening to someone whose understanding of their craft was so deep that extraordinary achievements were simply the natural result of proper preparation. Why didn't you correct me this morning? Morrison asked suddenly. When I made assumptions about your role here. Maya looked directly at him for the first time since their conversation began. With respect, sir, would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating, trying to impress a visiting officer? The question hit Morrison like a slap. She was absolutely right. If she had claimed to be a sniper that morning, he would have dismissed it as either fantasy or an attempt to gain attention. His biases were so entrenched that no amount of self-advocacy would have overcome them. I've learned that the best way to handle assumptions, Maya continued, is to let competence speak for itself. Eventually the truth comes out. Morrison felt the full weight of his morning's behavior settling on his shoulders. Not only had he been wrong about Maya's capabilities, but his assumptions had prevented him from recognizing one of the most skilled operators he'd ever encountered. How many other times had his preconceptions blinded him to exceptional talent? I owe you an apology, Morrison said, his voice heavy with genuine regret. My behavior this morning was unprofessional and based on assumptions that had no foundation in reality. Maya nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond, her attention returning to the rifle she was reassembling. Morrison watched her work, now recognizing the reverence with which she handled the weapon. Not the careful attention of a maintenance technician, but the intimate familiarity of a master craftsman with their primary tool. Can I ask you something else? Morrison said. Maya glanced up, indicating he should continue. How many other records do you hold that aren't in the official files? A ghost of a smile crossed Maya's face. A few, she said simply. Morrison realized that Maya's 3,247-meter shot might not even be her most impressive achievement, just the one that had been officially documented. Her quiet confidence suggested depths of capability that would probably never be fully known outside the classified world of special operations. As Morrison prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. If you ever decide you want to work with a SEAL team, he said, I'd consider it an honor to have you. Maya looked up from her work, studying Morrison's face to gauge his sincerity. After a moment she nodded. I'll keep that in mind, sir. As Morrison walked back across the base, his mind was spinning with the implications of the day's revelations. He'd built a career on being able to assess talent, on recognizing the qualities that separated elite operators from ordinary soldiers. Yet he'd spent an entire morning in the presence of extraordinary capability and completely failed to recognize it. The experience forced Morrison to confront uncomfortable truths about his own limitations. His expertise in tactics and leadership was real, but it had been compromised by biases so fundamental that he'd never even recognized them as biases. They were simply the natural order of things, assumptions about who belonged in combat roles that seemed as obvious as the laws of physics. Maya's achievement wasn't just a remarkable feat of marksmanship. It was a demonstration that excellence could appear in forms he'd never expected, in places he'd never thought to look. Her quiet competence challenged everything he thought he knew about what elite operators looked like, how they behaved, where they could be found. That evening, as Morrison reviewed his mission reports, he found himself questioning other assumptions that had shaped his career. How many times had he overlooked talent because it didn't fit his expectations? How many soldiers had been relegated to support roles not because of their abilities, but because of his inability to recognize those abilities? The next morning, Morrison returned to the weapons facility. Maya was there again, working with the same methodical precision, her movements as economical and purposeful as before. But now Morrison saw her differently, not as support personnel keeping his equipment ready, but as a fellow warrior whose achievements dwarfed his own. Sergeant Chin, he said as he approached her workstation. Maya looked up, her expression neutral but attentive. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, Morrison continued. About assumptions and about how competence speaks for itself. I wanted to thank you for the lesson. Maya nodded acknowledgement, but Morrison could see she was waiting for more than just gratitude. I'm putting together a recommendation, Morrison said. For advanced training opportunities, leadership development, maybe a position where your skills can have maximum impact. The military needs more people like you in operational roles. For the first time since Morrison had met her, Maya's expression showed genuine surprise. She set down the rifle component she was holding and gave Morrison her complete attention. "That's not necessary, sir," she said carefully. "I'm content with my current assignment." Morrison shook his head. "Content isn't the same as challenged. Someone with your abilities should be in a position where they can develop other snipers, share their knowledge, push the boundaries of what's possible." Maya considered this for a long moment. "And you think they'll listen to me? Accept training from someone they see the same way you saw me yesterday morning?" It was a fair question, and Morrison didn't have an easy answer. The military was changing, slowly recognizing that talent came in many forms, but institutional biases were deeply entrenched and wouldn't disappear overnight. "Some will," Morrison said finally. "And the ones who don't will learn the same lesson I did. That expertise doesn't always look the way you expect it to." Maya picked up her tools again, but Morrison could see she was thinking about his proposal. "I'll consider it," she said eventually. As Morrison prepared to leave the base that afternoon, he carried with him more than just mission intelligence and operational reports. He carried a fundamental shift in perspective that would influence every future interaction with subordinates, every assessment of capabilities, every decision about who belonged in which roles. Maya Chin had taught him that the most dangerous assumptions were the ones you never questioned, the biases so ingrained that they felt like common sense. Her 3,247-meter shot had shattered more than just a marksmanship record. It had shattered the comfortable certainties that had shaped his entire career. Months later, Morrison would receive reports about a new sniper training program that was revolutionizing long-range marksmanship instruction. The program was headed by a sergeant whose unconventional methods were producing results that surpassed anything in military history. Students who had struggled with traditional instruction were suddenly achieving precision that amazed their instructors. When Morrison read the name at the top of the report, Sergeant Maya Chin, Lead Instructor, Advanced Marksmanship Training, he smiled with genuine satisfaction. Competence had indeed spoken for itself, and the military was finally listening. The lesson of that morning in the weapons facility stayed with Morrison for the rest of his career. Every time he encountered someone in a role that seemed beneath their capabilities, every time he felt the urge to make assumptions based on appearance or assignment, he remembered the slight figure methodically cleaning a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, and the impossible shot that had redefined his understanding of what was possible. Maya Chin had shown him that true warriors often worked quietly in the background, letting their achievements speak louder than any boasting ever could. Her record-breaking shot was more than just exceptional marksmanship. It was a reminder that excellence takes many forms, and the most extraordinary capabilities are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize them.